13 on tolerance and non-discrimination, including combating racism, xenophobia, and discrimination, also focusing on intolerance and discrimination against Christians and members of other religions, combating anti-Semitism, and combating intolerance and discrimination against Muslims. I would like to announce at this point the speaking list is closed, and speakers will have 2.5 minutes per speaker, so please prepare accordingly. We would kindly ask you to submit your statements in advance to the interpreters. They won't be distributed without your permission, but preferably we would like to distribute them, and the statements can be provided to the documentation desk in the front of the plenary hall. Please do not speak very quickly to compensate for the 2.5 minutes, I'm sorry, but again, please submit your statements in advance. I'm Christina Finch. I'm the head of the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department, and I'd like to welcome our speaker here today. We've had a change in speaker. Our speaker this morning will be Mr. Alexander Verkhovsky, and he will be speaking in Russian, so please do prepare yourself if you will need translation. Mr. Verkhovsky is the director of the Sova Center for Information and Analysis, and has been since 2002. The Sova Center conducts monitoring on ultranationalist activities, hate crimes, hate speech in mass media, public actions, takes legal measures against these, the misuse of anti-extremism legislation, and also works on various issues related to religion in contemporary Russian society. The Sova Center publishes current news on these issues on their website on a daily basis, and also publishes books as well as quarterly and annual reports. Mr. Verkhovsky was an editor-in-chief of Samizdat independent newspaper Panorama in Moscow from 1989 to 1991, and a vice president of Panorama Information and Research Center from 1991 to 2002. Since 1994, Mr. Verkhovsky's main area of research has been political extremism, nationalism, and xenophobia in contemporary Russian, as well as religion and politics in contemporary Russia. He is an author and co-author of numerous books, reports, and articles on these issues. Mr. Verkhovsky, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I will speak Russian as was said.
Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the topic of our meeting today is rather broad. It's intolerance with various criteria such as racism, xenophobia, discrimination, also focusing on intolerance and discrimination against Christians and members of other religions. Unfortunately, discrimination and even direct aggression towards Jews, Muslims, Christians, and followers of other religions has become more and more a topic of discussion in recent years in OSCE countries, given the increasing phenomena. Now, certainly there are many victims, and this session brings together the discussion of many different kinds of intolerance. But it's important to discuss not only intolerance towards certain minorities. The Sova Center in Russia is, in its studies, noticing a number of links, various forms of xenophobia that exist in tandem, and not only in Russia. If we look at intolerance of Muslims, often this is linked with intolerance of any kind of migrants, and migrantophobia, as it were, seems to be something that is always present when there is intolerance of Muslims. So there are many different forms of intolerance, and we must very closely study them all so that we can better target the policies pursued by civil society and by governments. We have issued a comparative study, which I'm showing you here. Perhaps some of you here might be interested in it. We notice that despite all the differing legislation, there is a general trend, which is if in the past legislation was focused on ensuring public order. Now the trend, and I believe that this is true in the entire OSCE region, is towards regulating the treatment of people. Now, let me say that it is much more important to focus on educational programs and ensuring pluralism and mutual respect, as well as improving anti-discrimination legislation. Though direct discrimination against any religions is present in, or members of any religions is present in all OSCE countries, there are some areas where especially internet promotion of discrimination is even stronger. Representatives of authorities must react to the clearest forms and manifestations of intolerance in order to ensure that their populations understand they are not neutral on this account. Some of the most disturbing forms of intolerance are those demonstrated by officials or representatives of government. In these cases, it is important that such demonstrations of intolerance be curtailed and that officials be held accountable for their views. Of course, the freedom of expression of those serving in the government has certain limitations with respect to those of ordinary citizens. If we look at anti-migrant expressions, we note that certain forms of criticism, for instance, of Israel, can cause anti-Semitic mood among the population. And we also note that the tolerance of totalitarian sects can lead to the spread of intolerance among the population. Protests against such manifestations of intolerance are not always met with understanding because there can be disagreements about the interpretation of a certain statement. So it's important that there be broad discussion in society. Now, civil society groups promoting tolerance can counter these most effectively in the public space through various forms of various programs with government support. And civil society, given its great variety and the fact that it is related critically to the government, is of course an important player. The official representatives of the OSCE can also play an important role in supporting civil society initiatives, and the visits of special representatives in a number of countries can be have a positive effect. Now, publicly countering intolerance can in itself, however, lead to new problems. And this is especially true of situations when one representative of one community shows intolerance towards a representative of another community. All religions and all philosophies do have a history of dialogue. Now, if we are trying to ensure mutual respect among civil society and equal rights, we must focus on those elements of our tradition that promote tolerance and values of harmony and mutual respect, and not on those that are exclusive. We must note, however, that in our history there have been many episodes of intolerance related to religion, and we must acknowledge these. And civil society actors and government representatives must clearly speak against intolerance. On the whole, when we talk within the OSCE about tolerance and intolerance, we're talking about human rights and non-discrimination. These categories are related to the individual, and they can be extended to groups or organizations, such as religious ones, though different countries carry out different policies with respect to making distinctions between members of organizations. Equal rights, however, is obviously a foundation with which no one disagrees. This is true of religious minorities in Christianity and Islam. It's important that states not take upon themselves any resolution or interpretation of religious traditions, determining whether or not they are correct or incorrect. At this conference, we have heard a lot of statements about the violations of rights of certain groups. Now, if representatives of a certain community talk about their problems, we often hear this in international conferences and in national discussions that representatives of opposing views complain about limitations and insist that their views are correct. In Russia, this can lead to a situation in which the supporters of secularism and supporters of the Russian Orthodox Church consider themselves to be minorities, and each believes itself to be under pressure. All people, irrespective of their religion, have these same rights and may criticize the positions of their opponents as well as the positions of the government. It is necessary that we all recognize our responsibilities even as we criticize our opponents. Let me also say that in all manifestations of racism and intolerance, whether it be towards Christians, Muslims, Jews, these are problems in democratic countries, such as many of the OSCE countries. These must be solved through improving society's dialogue, and also education must be improved. And of course, these organizations must have dialogue among each other. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Berkowski. That's obviously a very wide topic, and I think you've covered it quite well and drawn out some of the similarities in the struggle between the communities. I'd like to turn now to the speaker list. Again, a reminder that speaking time is limited. We will have 2.5 minutes for interventions per intervention. When you speak, please introduce yourself with your name, your organization, or delegation. We'd ask you to keep comments brief and to the point. Criticism is, of course, welcome, but please make it constructive and attached to concrete recommendations. The first speaker I have on the list is France on behalf of the EU. Please go ahead, or we'll move to the next speaker then. Oh, no, sorry.
I apologized. My attention slipped for a minute. Madam Moderator, I will speak on behalf of the European Union, and I would like to specify that the following states join the declaration: Turkey, the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia, Montenegro, Albania, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Norway, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, Andorra, and Samara. The fight against discriminations and all forms of intolerance are among the EU's priorities, both in terms of its internal policy and its foreign policy and international cooperation, including at the OSCE level. Our main recommendations are as follows. For participating states, to ensure that each individual may, without distinction, enjoy their fundamental human rights and freedoms and have access to effective recourse in cases of discrimination or a violation of their rights. Secondly, to foster learning of diversity, dialogue, tolerance, to tear down prejudices by promoting human rights in inclusive and fair societies. Thirdly, to work for better understanding and tolerance between communities. Fourthly, to condemn on a systematic basis calls to hatred, whatever the authors, the motives, or the targeted communities might be. Fifthly, to actively cooperate with the BIDDH to prevent and combat all forms of intolerance. Recommendations to the BIDDH, which is ODIHR, to foster reflection on works by personal representatives of the chairmanship with ODIHR for better coherence and activities within the human dimension at the OECD level, to take on board the various forms of discrimination in the promoting human rights and the fight against intolerance. The implementation of OECD commitments in terms of fighting all forms of intolerance and discrimination, including when this happens for religious motives, calls for the EU to step up its activities, just as the economic and social crisis and the international context are leading to more and more acts of hatred. To deal with this, the EU is building on a robust legal mechanism. 3 directives aim to combat discriminations, racism and xenophobia, as well as public incitement to violence. I will give the full statement to the Secretariat. The statement comprises a more thorough outline of the measures taken by the EU to achieve the goals that I mentioned earlier under the recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next speaker will be Atheist Ireland, followed by Forum 18 News Service.
Jane Donnelly from Atheist Ireland. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Ireland openly discriminates against atheists and members of minority faiths in our education system. The Irish state claims that it is constitutionally obliged to support this discrimination in order to buttress religion. Almost all of our primary schools are funded by the state but run privately by churches, 90% by the Catholic Church. The state cedes control of our education system to these churches. They can insist that children of non-Catholic families are baptized into the Catholic Church in order to get into their only local publicly funded school. They are legally obliged to integrate religion throughout the entire curriculum, and no opt-out is provided. Also, Ireland legally denies teachers equal access to the teaching profession in almost all state-funded schools if they are atheist or members of a minority faith. Not only that, but Ireland claims an exemption from the European Equality Directive in order to continue this open religious discrimination. All of our equality laws support this religious discrimination. To add insult to injury, Ireland is now amending this law to protect Catholic LGBT teachers, which of course we support, but retaining the right to discriminate against teachers who are atheist or minority faith members. This religious discrimination, coordinated jointly by the Irish state and the Catholic Church, breaches the human rights of freedom of religion or belief, freedom from discrimination and equality before the law. Ireland has ignored 8 separate requests from the United Nations and the Council of Europe to end this religious discrimination. We ask the OSCE to ask Ireland and the Holy See to end this religious discrimination and to respect our human dignity and our human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Forum 18 News Service, followed by Christian Solidarity Worldwide. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. My full statement is on the distribution system. Our agenda and Alexander Vukovsky have reminded us of the need for a common approach to prevent intolerance and discrimination. As 2016 Chair in Office Germany has reminded us, the human dimension commitments are, quotes, the linchpin of European security. We can see this in freedom of original belief and other violations documented in Crimea by the ODIHR with the OSCE High Commissioner on National Minorities. The most systemic and consistent threats to freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief and other fundamental freedoms come from participating states, which target not isolated categories of anti-Semitism, Muslims and Christians and members of other religions, but any and all people who exercise their fundamental freedoms outside state control. The need for a human rights-based approach is highlighted by Kazakhstan, which has used state intimidation against people wanting dialogue with the UN Special Rapporteurs on both freedom of original belief and the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and of association. My colleagues Mina Yildirim from the Norwegian Helsinki Committee and Susan Kerr from Christian Solidarity Worldwide will also give other specific examples of the need for a human rights-based, equal and non-discriminatory approach to freedom of religion or belief. So what can constructively be done in relation to violations by equal opportunity oppressors such as Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan and other participating states? Participating states, OSCE institutions and field operations could, 1. Insist that human dimension commitments are implemented in full by all participating states. 2. Situate freedom of religion or belief within an all human rights for all perspective, making its aim assisting implementation of the freedoms of religion or belief and other fundamental freedoms, inclusive of expression, assembly, and the right to be free from torture. 3. Mainstream work to ensure and promote freedom of religion or belief with its intertwined human rights, building on the other work of the Human Rights Department and the Tolerance and Non-Discrimination Department. Finally, use tools such as the EU guidelines on the promotion and protection of freedom of original belief, the OSCE Venice Commission joint guidelines on the legal personality of original communities, and the OSCE guidelines on the protection of human rights defenders. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for those concrete recommendations. Next, we have Christian Solidarity Worldwide, followed by the Norwegian Helsinki Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Christian Solidarity Worldwide, together with Forum 18 and the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, all agree upon the need for a human rights-based approach for freedom of religion or belief across the OSCE participating states. Focusing on Turkey, the erosion of the state's constitutionally guaranteed secular impartiality by the AKP is of particular concern for vulnerable groups and people, both religious and non-religious, who face state discrimination and social hostilities. In Turkey's recent United Nations Universal Periodic Review, several OSCE participating states represented here today raised the situation of the 20 million Turkish Alevis, whose houses of worship are not legally recognized by the government. States such as France also called upon Turkey to put an end to mandatory religion courses for the Alevis. Moreover, reports of attacks on Alevi homes and properties continue, often with impunity for perpetrators. Christians in Turkey face the non-restitution of seized property. They do not receive permits to build churches, nor are they able to train their clergy. Converts from Islam can face delay and harassment when changing their religion on ID cards. Justice can remain elusive. For example, for the families of the 3 Protestant Christians murdered in Malatya in 2007, or following the recent attack by policemen on St. Georgios Armenian Catholic Church in Diyarbakir on 7 September 2015. The Jewish population has generally been able to worship freely and has received government protection. The government spent $2.5 million to restore the Great Synagogue and participated in the UN's Holocaust Day for the first time earlier this year. Despite this, social hostilities to Jews remain widespread, and hate speech must be addressed before it causes greater social harm, as Dr. Yildirim from the Norwegian Helsinki Committee will address. In terms of recommendations, Christian Solidarity Worldwide recommends Turkey ensure that all religion or belief groups and their institutions can obtain legal personality and exercise their internationally established rights. Effectively prosecute those who attack places of worship or individuals due to their religion or belief, and provide the victims of rights violations with reparations. Educate all public officials, including those charged with law enforcement, in their duty to protect the rights of religious minorities in a manner consistent with the International Human Rights Framework on freedom of religion or belief. Our full statement can be found on the website. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have the Norwegian Helsinki Commission, followed by the Baha'i International Community Brussels office. Please.
Thank you. This is Mine Yildirim from the Norwegian Helsinki Committee. Intolerance against a number of religious or belief groups, as well as non-believers in many participating states, manifest themselves in diverse ways and raise concerns. We fully support the human rights-based approach to freedom of religion or belief advocated by Forum 18 and CSW. We call upon the government of the Kyrgyz Republic to ensure that the state's measures to prevent terrorism do not fuel intolerance and discrimination of believers or non-believers. We also call on the Turkish government to fully protect freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief. We are in particular concerned about the series of prosecutions directed at atheist individuals and atheist websites in Turkey. The use of Article 216 of the Turkish Criminal Code against critics of the Islamic religion raises many questions, including freedom of expression and freedom of religion or belief. We further recommend that the Turkish government recognize the trends of intolerance in Turkey and take a multi-pronged approach towards prevention and effective investigation and prosecution where intolerance occurs. We also call on the Turkish government to effectively protect, monitor hate speeches, threats and attacks against individual members of religious or belief communities and the places that are considered sacred to their communities, and ensure that these do not result in impunity. In this context, the marking of Alevi houses in Adıyaman, Elazığ and Istanbul have led to fears among the Alevi community, who have been subjected to violent acts in the past. States have a duty to prevent, investigate and prosecute violations of human rights. We are concerned over the hate speech directed towards religious or belief communities. The Hrant Dink Foundation, which monitors hate speech in the Turkish media, reports that in Turkey, the Jewish community is the community that is most subjected to hate speech. The Jewish community is followed very closely by Christians. Hate speech towards Jews sees a dramatic rise in relation to international political developments related to Israel, whereas hate speech toward Christians increases significantly at Christmas time. Despite important gestures that show goodwill by the state, such as the restoration of the Grand Synagogue in Edirne, these unfortunately do not amount to effective protection against intolerance and discrimination of believers and non-believers, or the guarantee of freedom of religion or belief for all. As is well known, tolerance as such does not confer any rights. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We now have the Baha'i International Community Brussels office, which will be followed by CST Community Security Trust. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. My name is Rochelle Bayani. We really believe that the question of discrimination, racism, and intolerance needs to be viewed in its broader context. Essentially, they are manifestations of the tendency to narrowly identify with certain cultural, social, or even physical characteristics, and really placing them at the center of our understanding of self. And in order to help prevent such narrow identifications, we believe that we need to search for ways to strengthen our collective awareness of humanity's underlying oneness and really expand our understanding of our overarching, primary, and human identity. This is not to dismiss the secondary identities and their diversity. They're a source of strength and wealth. Rather, we need to learn to focus on our primary identity in a way that simultaneously values the many second aspects of human diversity. Instead of constantly re-emphasizing and affirming the legitimacy of these secondary identities, we believe that it would be more helpful and effective for institutions, policymakers, and civil society and also religious leaders to really strive to cultivate patterns of thought, speech, and action that promote this primary human identity. And the Baha'i international community therefore really encourages the OSCE to explore how educational processes and capacity building endeavors can reinforce this collective awareness of humanity's oneness, especially among the younger generations and the youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have the Community Security Trust, followed by Human Rights Without Frontiers.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm Mike Wine from the Community Security Trust. In the aftermath of the dramatic rise in anti-Semitic incidents last year and terrorist attacks on Jewish institutions in Brussels, Paris, and Copenhagen, Jewish communities are asking themselves if they have a future in Europe. Some thousands have already fled, and more may also be moving. This is not just our concern, it's also yours. The governments of the OSCE region bear a responsibility for securing the safety of their Jewish citizens. It is your duty to ensure that normative Jewish life can continue, and it is the right of Jews to demand that their governments fulfill their responsibilities in this respect. Following the 2014 Berlin High-Level Conference devoted to the security needs of Jewish communities, the Basel Ministerial Council Declaration committed participating states to doing more to secure their Jewish citizens, including funding physical security precautions. Some states responded positively and now provide good security for their Jewish citizens. Others are failing their Jewish citizens and have yet to do anything more than talk to Jews. But Jews do not want to live behind high walls, nor do they want to fear walking on the streets. They especially do not want to be held hostage to the outcome of tension between Israel and its Palestinian neighbors, which is such a marked feature in the rise of anti-Semitism over the past 10 or so years. We're pleased, therefore, to note that the OSCE plans to take forward the recommendations from the Vienna meeting held in April between some participating states, civil society experts, and Jewish community representatives, and to now formulate concrete proposals for a program to address these concerns. Jewish representative bodies also believe that their work to combat anti-Semitism, and indeed that of the European agencies, would be assisted by the use of a working definition on anti-Semitism, which the OSCE helped to draft and which is designed to assist human rights bodies and law enforcement agencies. These concrete proposals will have to be seriously employed by participating states if they wish to demonstrate their commitment to their Jewish citizens' security and communal well-being. We're therefore pleased to note that the incoming German chairmanship told us last night that among their priorities for the coming year are the implementation of OSCE commitments and countering anti-Semitism. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you very much. We now have Human Rights Without Frontiers, followed by FORAF Europe.
Thank you, Mrs. Moderator. My statement will be about the abuse of the anti-extremist legislation. In Russia, the anti-extremist legislation is a major source of threat to freedom of conscience. Representatives of different religions are wrongfully persecuted under the provisions of this legislation, but certain groups, such as Muslims and Jehovah's Witnesses, are the most affected. That's why we call upon the Russian authorities to follow the repeated recommendations of the UN Human Rights Committee that the federal law on combating extremist activity should be revised without undue delay, with a view to clarifying the vague and open-ended definition of extremist activity, ensuring that the definition requires an element of violence or hatred, and establishing clear and precise criteria on how materials may be classified as extremist. We also call upon the Russian authorities to release the 1 million brochures of Jehovah's Witnesses blocked by the customs in St. Petersburg for allegedly containing extremist material, while such brochures are distributed worldwide in more than 100 countries without any restriction or problem. and 3, to lift the ban on the works of the Turkish Muslim theologian Said Nursi, as they do not contain any call to violence, or to stop prosecuting those who read his books. A number of Said Nursi readers have recently been sentenced in Russia for reading the books of that theologian. In Ulyanovsk, for example, 3 Muslims who were accused of reading such works have lost their appeal against convictions for extremist activity. Kazikhanov, who was detained in police custody until the appeal hearings, was sentenced in February to 3.5 years imprisonment for organization of extremist activity. He was the first reader of Nursi's books since September 2013 to receive a jail sentence. There are more examples concerning Said Nursi readers and also Jehovah's Witnesses, but you can find that in our statement on the website of the OSCE. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have 4F Europe, who will be followed by the United States of America.
David Baer, 4F Europe. My statements are a summary of the paper Hungary Amended Church Law Remains at Variance with OSCE Standards in the European Convention on Human Rights, which is submitted on the webpage and which will be distributed at the 4F side session this afternoon at 1 o'clock. 4F calls upon the government of Hungary to refrain from further changes to the legal status of religious communities except to remedy the violations of the right of religious freedom arising from the deregistration of churches in 2011. To extend legal privileges to churches on the basis of objective criteria alone and not on the basis of discretionary prerogatives claimed by the state or parliament. To treat all religious communities equally in matters pertaining to religious practice, and to rewrite the proposed amendments to Act 206 of 2011 to harmonize with Helsinki standards, international human rights law, and the ruling of the European Court on Human Rights in Magyar Keresztény Mennonita Egyház v. Hungary. The new proposed amendments will introduce a 3-tiered classification system of religious communities. The amendments stipulate that incorporated churches, currently the most privileged churches in Hungary, will automatically be reclassified as certified churches, even though the majority of incorporated churches do not meet the criteria for certified churches in the law. Certified churches must either have at least 10,000 members or have received church income tax from at least 4,000 people over 5 years, but based on census data, only 6 of the 39 incorporated churches have a membership of 10,000 or more, and based on tax data, only 11 of the 31 incorporated churches consistently received income tax from over 4,000 people between 2011 and 2014. Furthermore, unlike incorporated churches, religious associations will have to apply with the courts for new legal status. The government of Hungary is thus proposing to implement its amendments in a way that both disregards the text of its own law and which also treats incorporated churches and religious communities unequally. The amendments would also allow the state to enter into cooperative agreements with certified churches on a discretionary basis. The provision for discretionary subsidy of some, but not all, religious communities amounts to a 4th category of legal recognition. According to statements of the representative of the Hungarian government, this will be exercised by Parliament. OSCE standards require that the state remain impartial in its treatment of religious communities. Any decision to enter into cooperative agreements must be based on criteria. Procedure by which Parliament selects churches does not guarantee that the decisions will be made on objective and impartial basis. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. We now have the United States of America, who will be followed by the Constantinopolitan Society.
Thank you. The United States firmly believes that strengthening our joint efforts to combat anti-Semitism as well as intolerance and discrimination against Muslims, Christians, and members of other religions is a key element of ensuring security and respect for all people. We commend the sustained engagement of the OSCE Chairman and Office's personal representative on anti-Semitism, Rabbi Baker, and the ODIHR Tolerance Unit with the Jewish community. We welcome the OSCE Parliamentary Assembly's appointment of U.S. Senator Benjamin Cardin to serve as Special Representative on Anti-Semitism, Racism, and Intolerance. We applaud efforts to launch an OSCE anti-Semitism toolkit and convene stakeholders early next year under the leadership of the German chairmanship. Anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim hate crimes have increased, we urge participating states to support ODIHR's efforts to strengthen civil society coalitions against intolerance. ODIHR efforts to combat anti-Muslim prejudice are worthy of additional investments and expansion. We are also concerned about discrimination against Christians in some participating states, particularly where the state grants special privileges to one church and excludes others, such as Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and certain Catholic and Orthodox communities. We remain concerned over the official formation of a Europe of Nations and Freedom grouping within the European Parliament. We urge the EU and individual governments to ensure sustained attention to anti-Semitism by appointing envoys for that purpose. We also agree with the closing statement of the Swiss chair in office at last year's Berlin conference that the working definition of anti-Semitism disseminated by the EU Monitoring Center remains a useful tool for governments and civil society in explaining how anti-Zionism is frequently a mask for anti-Semitism. The United States has seen our own instances of religious intolerance, and as a result, the Department of Justice works to protect the rights to practice one's faith freely and without discrimination. The ODIHR Tolerance Unit's current activities include efforts to combat anti-Semitism and engagement with vulnerable Muslim and African descent communities. We urge participating states to support these efforts by increasing funding for ODIHR within the unified budget and through extra budgetary projects. We welcome the launch of ODIHR's hate crimes website last year. 32 participating states have fulfilled the commitments to provide hate crime data to ODIHR. We encourage the remaining participating states to do so without delay. More work is needed to ensure that the data is understood and is inclusive and accurate for all affected communities, including hate crimes committed against persons with disabilities. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much for those concrete recommendations. We now have the Constantinopolitan Society, followed by Serbia.
My name is Antonis Lambidis from the Constantinopolitan Society in Greece. Non-Muslim minorities in Turkey have suffered many injustices as a result of discriminatory and oppressive state policies. With regard to the Greek minority in particular, these policies have led to the dramatic decline of the Greek population of Turkey from over 100,000 in the 1950s to less than 2,000 at present. Despite official statements, the Turkish government has failed to take decisive actions to make the necessary institutional and administrative reforms to reverse these conditions. The property rights of the Greek minority foundations continue to be violated. Turkish authorities systematically restrict the access to the state land registry, thus annulling any legal right of minority members to claim their confiscated properties. The number of properties seized from Greek community foundations is over 900. Turkey is called upon to return the 3 churches in Karaköy, Galata in Istanbul, as well their immovable properties, which are illegally and forcibly occupied by the self-declared and non-existent Turkish Orthodox Patriarchate to their legal owners. Turkish authorities should grant them full legal entity status so as to be able to elect their governing bodies and freely administer and manage their own foundations. Since January 2013, the elections within the minority foundations administrations cannot be held because the General Directorate of Foundations has not yet issued new regulations. Turkish government should restitute Turkish Republic citizenship to Greek minority members living abroad and should issue permanent residence and work permit to those who are willing to live in Turkey. During this year, at least 4 hate crimes have been reported in Turkey, originating from racism, nationalism, and intolerance. Although many hate crimes committed in Turkey enter the reports of the OSCE, the Turkish state does not investigate and prosecute these crimes. No bodies were created to deal with hate crimes, and there are no activities to prevent them in Turkey. In addition, there are no legal provisions to punish hate crimes. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. We now have Serbia, who will be followed by the Russian Federation.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Dusan Kozarev, Deputy Director in the Office for Kosovo and Metohija of the Republic of Serbia. In Kosovo and Metohija, Serbian religious heritage is an essential element of national identity. Serbian Orthodox churches and monasteries in Kosovo and Metohija are proof of the antiquity of Serbian statehood, suffering and survival of its people, and Serbs are deeply attached to them. Religious monuments listed as World Heritage were exposed to the destructive Albanian nationalism even before 1999 conflict. Residential facility in Patriarchate of Peć was set on fire, while other monuments were repeatedly plundered and desecrated during the 80s of the 20th century. The church Our Lady of Levish in Prizren, that is under UNESCO protection, was looted and damaged in 1999, while the parish hall building was torched to the ground. After the 1999 deployment of respective international presence in Kosovo and Metohija, 141 of Serbian Orthodox churches and monasteries were completely or significantly damaged. Only during the violence in March 2004, 35 religious sites of the Serbian Orthodox Church were demolished and destroyed. The Visoki Dečani monastery from the 14th century, which is also under UNESCO protection, is the most frequently attacked Christian religious site in Kosovo and Metohija. Monastery suffered 4 armed attacks in 1999, 2 mortar attacks in 2000, another mortar attack during riots in March 2004, and finally a grenade launcher attack in 2007. In October 2014, buildings within the monastery property were painted with the graffiti ISIS, Caliphate is coming, UCK, Albanian National Army. For 2 decades already, incidents based on hatred have been jeopardizing the collective dimension of freedom of religion in Kosovo and Metohija. Breaking and looting of churches, writing graffiti, harassment of monks, usurpation of church property, illegal construction of church land, and desecration of Orthodox cemeteries are still occurring on a daily basis in Kosovo and Metohija. Serious problem is repeated obstruction of celebration of Christian holidays. It became practice that radical movement self-determination prevents celebration of Christmas, Easter, traditional Serbian annual pilgrimage of St. Vitus Day, memorial service, and All Souls Day. Only in the first 6 months of 2015, there have been 9 incidents involving UCK and ISIS graffiti, looting of churches, destruction of Orthodox cemeteries, and even desecration of the monument to the children killed in Serbian enclave of Goraždevac. Let me emphasize that none of mentioned criminal acts have been either prosecuted or penalized so far. To the contrary, in July 2015, an appellate panel of the Special Chamber of the Supreme Court reached a decision that the Supreme Court does not have jurisdiction in the case between the Serbian Orthodox monastery of Visoki Dečani and the municipality of Dečani over disputed land near the monastery. Despite all previous instances, including the regular panel of the Special Chamber of the Supreme Court, which has ruled in favor of the monastery, the appellate panel declared the court incompetent and instructed that the case...
I would kindly ask you to summarize your remarks.
Yes. Furthermore, in August 2015, an evaluation of relevant procedures, 19th century guest house was demolished in the historic center of Prizren without the approval of the Municipality Cultural Heritage Council. Having in mind such circumstances, we believe that there is no legal, neither moral ground for so-called Republic of Kosovo to become a member of UNESCO. Thank you.
Thank you. We now have the Russian Federation, followed by Switzerland. Thank you.
Madam Chair, colleagues, when we speak about religion, I suggest that we reflect on what is currently happening in the OSCE area. Just take the case of refugees. No one even pauses to think about the religious rights of these poor people. Their basic rights are trampled, including the right to life. They are fleeing wars, which have been unleashed by the West under the pretext of defending democracy. But when these people reach so-called enlightened Europe, it turns out that they don't even have a place to sleep. They are forced to while time away with their children along railway tracks. Yet some European media publish sordid caricatures, including of a religious content. Even by the most pessimistic estimates, we're talking about millions of refugees, and we have to uphold the rights of millions of refugees. But this isn't happening, not even not in the EU's territory. So what right, then, do these people have to impose values on the rest of mankind? You can deny all you like what is currently happening in the OSCE area and the fact that that is the direct consequence of EU Western policy in the Middle East and Northern Africa. Europe is paying a dear price for its irresponsibility and underscoring the need to involve Russia in addressing European problems now. The president of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, has repeatedly warned against the danger of reformatting whole regions through colored revolutions. The weakening of central powers, including in Damascus, will not achieve a political solution to the Syrian crisis. On the contrary, it will lead to Syria being overrun by Islamists and ensuing assaults on neighbouring states. Just imagine how many waves of Muslim refugees will sweep across Europe then. And what will EU institutions do then, even be it only on the human rights field? Will they abandon their European values, especially their Christian ones? Will they shamefully start banning the wearing of Christian crosses? Will they fire civil servants who refuse to register LGBT marriages? Colleagues, this isn't freedom, it's not equality. We're talking about losing one's bearings completely. That's what we need to think about. When you talk about the freedom of fundamental freedoms, including in the Russian Federation, we'll be able to hear more about this in a different meeting room at 6 o'clock. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now have Switzerland, who will be followed by the Department for External Church Relations of Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Thank you.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Switzerland condemns all forms of discrimination, xenophobia, racism, or other forms of intolerance. During the Swiss chairmanship of the OSCE, Switzerland took an active engagement against discrimination and intolerance, and in particular in the fight against anti-Semitism. Switzerland is glad to note that the Conference on Anti-Semitism that was held in Berlin on 13th November 2014 led to the adoption of the Basel Ministerial Declaration on strengthening efforts in combating anti-Semitism. In order to ensure the effective implementation of the declaration at the national level, Switzerland has commissioned a specific study of self-evaluation and of follow-up measures. This study, which is currently underway, has already revealed the need to focus in particular on combating the spread of anti-Semitism on the internet and in social media. The importance of ensuring effective and systematic criminal investigations of any hate crimes are also noted. An awareness-raising day will be organized on 1st December 2015 in Bern, together with Jewish organizations in Switzerland, on the topic of the situation of the Jewish minority in the country and the challenges that it faces. This event will provide an opportunity to discuss the duties of prevention and protection on the part of the state at all administrative levels with respect to anti-Semitic threats or hostile acts. Madam Moderator, the three personal representatives of the chairman in office on tolerance and non-discrimination play a special and important role in the entire OSCE region in denouncing anti-Semitism, intolerance, and discrimination against Muslims, as well as against Christians and other religions. Switzerland would like to emphasize the importance of this mandate, which requires special coordination by all three personal representatives. In conclusion, we have two recommendations for participating states. First, to immediately implement the Basel Ministerial Declaration on strengthening efforts in combating anti-Semitism, and secondly, to promote all forms of cooperation and partnership with civil society, and especially with cultural and religious organizations, in order to raise awareness about the negative effects of discrimination and to promote respect as well as understanding between diverse ethnic and religious communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those concrete recommendations. We now have the Department for External Church Relations of Ukrainian Orthodox Church, who will be followed by NGO Public Advocacy. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. In the past 6 months, with respect to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the largest religious organization in the country, we have noticed a number of hostile acts which can be considered discriminatory. Specifically, in January of 2015, deputies of the Kiev City Council adopted a decision which provided benefits to religious organizations of Kiev in the form of exemptions from real estate tax. The only exception were the religious communities of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church. Now, this is clearly an unconstitutional and discriminatory decision, but it was nevertheless overturned by the decision of the District Administrative Court of Kiev in June of 2015. Let me say that such a violation similar violations, rather, of rights against the Ukrainian Orthodox Church have been carried out by the Ternopil and Lviv Oblast councils. Another sphere of action where the most violations of believers' rights occur are the so-called transfers of parishes of our Ukrainian Orthodox Church to the jurisdiction of the so-called Kiev Patriarchate. We're in fact talking about our churches simply being seized during raids and attacks instigated by supporters of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church of the Kiev Patriarchate, who use political forces in order to do so. As of today, approximately 28 churches belonging to the Ukrainian Orthodox Church have been seized, while 4 religious communities have voluntarily changed their jurisdiction. I'd like to clarify that we're not talking about the free change of jurisdiction according to the law of Ukraine on freedom of conscience and religious organizations. No, these are takeovers using force of violence and deceit. The latest example of lawlessness was the seizure this